Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Tealand Knits Knitting Podcast. My name's Natasha. I'm originally from the UK, but I currently live on a tropical island called Sri Lanka with my husband Bob. And thank you very much for joining me today. Just at the start, I want to let you know that you can find me on Instagram if you'd like to follow along with different projects and things that I'm working on in between podcasts. I'm Tealand Knits. And also on Ravelry, I'm also Tealand Knits, and I'll put that information in my notes at the end of this podcast. So yeah, I'm not feeling 100% today, so I don't know how long I'll be talking for. I'm a bit frustrated because I was ill, as you know, last month, and I wasn't expecting to get this cold that's been going around. And my husband got it a couple of weeks ago now, and so I thought I was clear of it because I hadn't picked up anything for ages. And then this is the end of the second week of him being ill, and I started to get a sore throat. So I'm a bit frustrated. My voice is sounding a little bit off, but the cold hasn't been as bad as it was last time. So I'm hoping that because I have some remaining immunity from then, some lingering immunity, hopefully I won't get as sick as I was last time. So let's hope this is just a passing cold. So I have some works in progress and some finished objects to share with you. So let's start with these. So these are some socks. Surprise, surprise. And I think I did show you these on the last podcast. But I finished them. So these are the vanilla trifle socks. I am working on the pattern for them at the moment. They're a bit like a basic vanilla sock, but just a little bit elevated. They've got a striped pattern that is just like a slight bit of stranded colour work, not very difficult at all, but it just elevates it and gives you like a little bit of interest when you're knitting it, and it helps you to break up that just vanilla stockinette stitch. I did knit them in white, but then that really makes the colour pop. I did a long leg, and usually all of my socks are pretty long. I usually do a long leg because I wear them in boots. And then actually, usually my foot will reach around the cuff. So the toe and the cuff usually line up when I've knit the sock and fold it in half, because I don't have very big feet. I think I've got a UK size 5 foot. I'm not sure what that is in American sizes. Is it a 7? I'm not sure. But yes, I did this rounded toe. And I usually do knit a little bit extra on the heel flap, because I've got slightly high arches, and so I find that knitting a bit extra on the heel flap and having a slightly taller gusset helps me to have socks that fit me better. Not really much else to tell you. Basically, I knit one sock and then I used this sock and copied it when making this one. So I just made sure that I put stitch markers along each section that I needed to, like for example, I knit the heel flap and then the heel turn. And these socks are easy because I use different colours. So I used 3 colours, one main colour and 2 contrasting colours. So for the contrasting colour, I think I used Drops Fabel Mustard. And so that very clearly showed me how many rows I did for the heel flap and gusset. And then I joined my first contrasting colour. And so it's very easy for me to count how many rows I did up to the end of the gusset decreases. Once I stopped the gusset decreases, I added a stitch marker, and then every 10 rows I added stitch markers, so I know that I did 10, 50, 50 non-decrease, 52 non-decrease rows. Yeah, and then I started the toe. So that's for my own foot, I know that that's what I need to do for these and also for vanilla socks. Did one, made sure I had all of the stitch markers on there, and then when I knit the second sock, I could just follow this sock and just make sure that they are exactly the same. So that was my finished object. I've already shown you this one. I haven't done the second sock for that yet, but I am working on it. The problem is that after knitting such a colourful sock, I did get a bit of second sock syndrome, and I didn't want to cast on another plain sock, even though I really want to wear those socks because I really love this colour, and I think they'll just be a brilliant everyday go with everything kind of sock, and they've got lovely texture on them as well. But I just didn't want to knit another sock in just one colour, and because there's no variation in the tone of this yarn, it's not variegated or tonal or anything. I just didn't feel like it, basically. And because I was ill when I was knitting that, and I'm ill again, I just wanted some colour. So I cast on, after I finished the first vanilla trifle pair, I cast on another vanilla trifle sock, but in a more plain colourway. So in a more neutral, rather, colourway. So this is Drops Dark Grey, I think it's called. Either Dark Grey or Dark Grey Mix, and it's Drops Nord again. And I find Drops Nord is really strong yarn. It is wool, alpaca, and nylon, I think. But you know when you, because I usually break my yarn with my hands, but when I go to break this yarn, it's really hard. It's harder than when I break like West Yorkshire Spinners yarn, because this is the signature 4-ply in the Robin colorway, and so when I broke that, it broke fairly easily. There was resistance, so it's not just going to break, especially while you're knitting it. It's great. But the Drops Nord was really hard to break, and it kind of hurts your hands a little bit. So really, I should be using scissors with that, but I don't. Yeah, so this is the dark grey mix, I think it's called, and this is also Drops Nord off-white. And I just paired those up, and you can better see the stripe pattern here. Yeah, not much else to say about that, but I'm really looking forward to wearing these. They're just so cute. Oh, and also I did do a shorter leg. So like I said, all of my socks have a longer leg. I usually knit something like this much. So I'll just use my hand. I'll knit my sock from the cuff down until I hit this length. And then I'll start my heel flap. And obviously it doesn't, because I'm only doing this measurement once. When I knit the second sock, I just copy this. So I get 2 pairs that are exactly the same. And that's usually the length that I like to knit my socks. But I thought if I wear some shorter boots the next time I'm in boots in the winter, I would like to wear some shorter socks, because when you wear the taller mid-calf socks, they do look a little bit odd, or can do anyway. And also I just like a little bit of clearance sometimes between my jeans and my boots, if I'm wearing shorter boots. So I just decided to knit a shorter sock. I think this is maximum 20 rows on the leg portion before I started the heel flap and gusset. And then I obviously did the cuff. I did a slightly taller cuff. I like having a slightly taller cuff in 2x2 rib because it's stretchier, and sort of hugs hugs the leg, and it will accommodate like a variety up to a point of calf sizes, because obviously it's stretchier. Same thing with the heel flap. I did it a little bit longer, so I think I added an additional 3 rows than what a standard heel flap would call for, just so that I was able to have a larger gusset so that they would accommodate my high arches. It just fits better. So yeah, so that is my work in progress. I did start these and I was well on my way with them. Yep, I was well on my way with these. And then I got distracted because I looked through the yarn that I own, and I saw a colorway that I've had in my stash for a little while. And I just suddenly knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. And I couldn't help it. I cast on. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll have seen this colorway. I've now put it on my little spindle. But look at that yarn. So when I first got this yarn, I loved it. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to use it for. And so it sat, because it's lovely. It's got tones of like a fresh sort of leafy green. I don't know if it's showing, but it's got like leafy green. It's got sort of a darker kind of forest green, and then it's got bits of brown in it as well. And it does reminds me of tea and chocolate and grass and matcha. Like it's got that kind of lighter and lighter tone, and it reminds me of mint. So I cast on some socks, and I won't go into detail on them now. I wanted to show you them because I just think they look perfect in this yarn. I tried them on. They fit lovely. They just look amazing to me. And really simple. Again, they're just a little bit like the next level up from a vanilla sock. So they're very easy to knit. And it adds a little bit of colour. So it's just this yarn and the Drops Nord Off-White. And I'll tell you who this yarn is by. Oh. I don't know how to pronounce this, but it's Lady Fernaco Creations. And this was a gift from my lovely friend Emma, and I really appreciated it at the time, and I really appreciate it now. And I've been saving it for something special, and I really think that these socks are special. It is a 75-25 blend of fine superwash merino and nylon, and it's in fingering weight. And I can't read the colorway on here because it's faded a bit, but I did look on her website and did find the colorway because I wanted to note it down, but I can't remember what it is. But I really love it. Love these, and it brings out all of the tones. I think having it sort of in sections, it really brings out the color palette better, because you kind of get little snapshots, like little Polaroid shots of each section, rather than it just being one. Because sometimes if you just have sort of one color, or one block of color rather, or one block of fabric, you can't see all of the lovely intricate details, but I feel like you can really pick up on them in this. So I think that's all of my works in progress and my finished objects, and I'm storing them in my special project bag. If you followed my channel and you had a look at my unboxing video, then you will have already seen these. So these are my new project bags. So I got a couple of lovely project bags from Martina at Original Source and Supply, which is a company that is based in Sri Lanka. Martina is the owner and designer, and she started the brand in 2016. Established 2016. And she's very kindly sent me 2 pouches because I thought these would make excellent knitting project bags, and they do. So in here I've got a little bit of yarn that I'm going to be using. So the leftover ball from this sock, which I will use to start my second sock. So I will need more yarn. I think it's like 41 grams. So that means that I've got, my brain is just so slow today, 9 grams left. And then I've also got a little bit of another little chunk of that yarn that I'd used for another project. So I thought I would just spit splice them together and use them all in the same sock. I'm storing my finished object vanilla trifle socks in there because I still need to weave in the ends. And the reason, so I've written up the pattern for them. It's pretty much ready, but the reason that I'm holding off is because I need to take pictures, and my sock blockers for the pictures are on the way. I haven't received them yet. So once I do, then I'll be able to take some pictures and get that pattern released. I'm storing my work in progress in there too. And yeah, and I think that's it. So that's this pouch. And then she also sent me, so I should say, this is the, it's called the OSAS pouch, and in ochre. And it was hand stitched. I love this. It was hand stitched by Pramitha. Each label has a little name of who hand stitched your item, which I think is so lovely. It's lovely to recognize the person who handcrafted this item. It also shows what good quality it is, and I know that the Original Source and Supply ethos is to produce high quality items that you're not going to just throw away. So this is made to last, and the fabric of it is so nice. It's lovely and thick, and I just feel like this is going to just get nicer and nicer and nicer over time. And then she also sent me the medium pouch. So that was the large pouch, and this is the medium pouch. And it's in grey. So that was the ochre, this is the grey. And in this I store a little bit of scrap yarn. So if I want to move a project onto scrap yarn to try it on or whatever. I've got some stitch markers in here. I've got my ChiaGoo needles. The, what are they called? Lace twist interchangeable needle set. And those are my preferred needles for sock knitting. And then I've got my gauge calculator, gauge ruler. And then I've also got some of my knitting needles that I use for socks. So these are the Addi, they're called Addi CrasyTrio shorts. But I think in America they're also called the Addi FlexiFlips, because they're like DPNs. They're like the next level of DPNs, double pointed needles. So I thought that I'd just talk about sock needles a little bit, because I did have a friend ask me about my preferred method of knitting socks, but also just a little bit of advice on sock needles. My friend who's also a viewer, so I thought if I release this, then that might be able to help her and any of you if you're thinking about knitting socks. So that's everything I store in there. Oh, and one other thing that I do store in there is a little bit of sewing thread, which is nylon, and I use it to just reinforce my heels on my socks, or you could use it to reinforce any parts of your socks that tend to wear out, especially when you're using very soft yarns like merino wool. They can, depending on the amount of wear or how hard you are on your socks, they can start to wear a bit more in certain areas. So some people find the backs of their heels, so you might want to strengthen it with some of this thread. You just hold it double with your yarn. So you can use that when you're doing the heel flap and the heel turn, and then you can just cut it. Some people find that their toes wear through faster. So you might decide that you wanted to reinforce the toe. There is actually some reinforcing, kind of like yarn that you hold double, that is a very thin weight. I think it's lace weight or thinner, but I just couldn't get my hands on any of that. So I did read that nylon thread can also help, can also work. So I decided to use that because that's what I've got access to. And so far, so good. Oh, there is something I did want to show you actually before I just talk about my sock needles. And that is, there is another way of reinforcing. Oh, I don't think you're going to be able to see this though because of the yarn colour. Let's see. Oh, maybe it's on the other sock. Sorry, just give me a moment. Yes, it is. Okay, so I know personally that when I wear socks, the first place they start to, because I was wearing them every day, wearing them at home, around the house, all the time. And I didn't have that many pairs of socks, so I was rotating maybe 4 to 5 pairs of socks, but constantly for months and months and months because it was really cold in England and I was just wearing socks every day, working from home. And my heels started to wear out and just under the toe as well. I've since worked out like to knit at a very tight gauge or a tighter gauge, and to measure my gauge. But something I've also done for my heel is I've carried the slip stitch pattern onto the heel. So the heel flap in a heel flap and gusset usually is knitted in some kind of slip stitch pattern. It's stretchier and it will hug that part of your foot really nicely. And then usually you just go into stockinette on the heel. And for a lot of people, they prefer stockinette on the heel as well because they don't like to walk on texture. So stockinette will be a nice even texture to walk on. Some people don't even like to walk on the pearl bump side of stockinette because their feet are very sensitive. So maybe those people would want to knit them sort of reverse. I know that there is one method where you can knit basically reverse stockinette. So you would purl, or use another method that some have found where you would purl and make sure that the purl bumps were on the outside, and the stockinette was actually on the inside, so you're walking on a flat surface. I don't have that problem. My feet aren't that sensitive, so I have well, I'm not sensitive to socks anyway. They're very sensitive, like very ticklish, but not sensitive to texture on socks. So I've got the slip stitch on the heel flap, and then I continued it onto the heel turn. So I'm hoping that this will stop my socks from wearing through on the heel. It just saves extra time having to go through and darn them, add a patch or something. And I also don't want to add extra fabric here that would be uneven, because then maybe my foot would feel that there was something different on the heel. But just with the slip stitch pattern, just on the very tip of the heel, I think that will be fine for me. Yes, so I use these Addi needles mainly for my heel flap and heel turn and toes. And also if I'm knitting my preferred method on 9-inch circulars, then I will knit the cuff. I will start the first actually I only do one round. I cast on these basically, and then I'll knit the first round onto the circulars. And that way, because I just find that when you cast on to 9-inch circulars, it can be a bit tight. That very first row can be a bit awkward. So rather than casting on and knitting that first row with the circulars, which I have done before, but I just prefer this because I want my knitting to be a pleasant, enjoyable experience. So I've just decided to cast on using the FlexiFlips and then knit the first row with the 9-inch circulars, and it just makes it more pleasant all round. I wanted to just talk a little bit, yes, about sock needles. All right, I've got some notes, so I'm going to refer back to those. All right, so there are a few different methods of knitting small circumferences. So I haven't got one with me, but obviously, you know, a jumper is like a larger circumference, because this is like the neckline. So you would start your jumper with a smaller circumference around the neck, and then obviously it would get larger and larger and larger. If you're knitting top down, it would get larger and larger and larger until you split for the body and the sleeves, and then it would get a bit smaller, but it's still a large circumference. When you knit socks, you want to knit them in the round. I guess you can knit socks flat, but why would you want to when knitting them in the round is just so much easier and more intuitive, and you can try them on the way as well. So obviously the circumference of a sock is quite small. It's kind of like a tight cuff. You know, if you were knitting a jumper and you wanted a snug cuff, you're looking at the cuff on your sock being kind of like the cuff of a jumper. You want your cuff to be nice and stretchy, so that it can accommodate your calf, depending on obviously how long your sock is going to be. Ankle socks don't need to be as stretchy, but obviously that depends again on the number of stitches you cast on. Yes, so there are a few different ways of knitting this small circumference, because you're starting off with a small circumference, and this looks smaller because it's ribbing, but actually, generally speaking, I mean, I do change the for size because I like my ribbing to be a little bit snugger. You can do that either by using a different needle size for your cuff and then a larger needle size for your leg and foot, or you can cast on a smaller number of smaller number of stitches and then increase after the cuff, and then have a larger number of stitches on the leg if you want to just stick with one needle size. So yes, there are a few different ways to knit small circumferences. Okay, I lost sound when I started filming the rest of the video about small circumference knitting. So I'm going to record it again, but I'm sorry if the sound is not working properly, or not as good as it was in the rest of the video, because my mics are on charge. So sorry about that. So there are a few different ways that you can knit in a small circumference. And the first one that I'm going to show you is with DPNs, or double pointed needles. Double pointed needles are just knitting needles that are smaller and they have 2 points. So you usually have 4 in like the traditional method, sorry, you usually have 5. So you have 4 where you distribute your stitches across the 4 needles, and it usually forms like a square. If you have longer needles, you can distribute them over 3, for example, and you would form a triangle. And then you use 1 needle to knit across those stitches. And so you knit a tube, or you knit a circle, spiral, with several smaller needles. And the reason that you need double pointed ones is because they will slide. Your stitches need to be worked off the ends of each side of the needle, worked off and on each side. And you can also slide your stitches up and down them and work from both ends, which is really handy. I use my needles for other things, so I've only got 2 in my needle case right now. Double pointed needles, they are the traditional method of small circumference knitting. They've been used for centuries, I guess, but they're great. I think they do require a bit of practice, and they do require a bit of planning. Practice because every time you change needles, so say that's 4 times if you're knitting traditionally across 4 needles, every time you change between needles, there is a little gap which can form a ladder at each of those 4 points, and that's due to tension issues. So the more that you knit with DPNs and knit that way, the more adept of it you become. And so it's fine. You won't eventually get those ladders, but it can be a bit annoying. Usually, especially if you're knitting with wool, they will block out, but it can be a bit frustrating to get those ladders. Also, you have to keep track of your needles. So usually you will number your needles, like needle 1, needle 2, needle 3, needle 4. And you need stitch markers, and you need to know which is which, because when you're knitting a sock, you need to know which stitches are your front stitches, because when you start a sock, it's all the same until you reach the heel. When you reach the heel, you create this gusset which has many more stitches on it than the leg, so you need to be able to differentiate between the front and the back of your knitting, and you also need to know where to decrease. So say you have all of your front stitches over 1 needle, and you have your back stitches distributed across 3 needles, for example, you would need to know which needles hold the decreased stitches, the stitches that you have to decrease to create the gusset and go back down to your foot circumference. So it's just keeping track of things, tension issues, and also for me, I find that it's a bit frustrating because I have to keep dropping and picking up my yarn. I think I did learn on DPNs, but I haven't knit with them for a while. But when I tension my yarn, I do it this way. And I know that it's a bit different for different people, and sometimes people will not have it wrapped around so many fingers. I think I do it because I don't know if I can show you this, but I flick the yarn off my finger onto the needle. Some people will just pick it up. Some people will just wrap it a little bit around their pinky finger. I don't actually know, maybe like this. But anyway, for me, I do like this funny wrapping movement, which is like a lot of little micro movements for me. And I think over time, if I had to do that all of the time, it would cause a little bit of like maybe a few issues with my joints or just some aches. Joint exercises do help, like stretches and things like that. And you know, something like this but still, the fewer extra movements I can make, the better, because I do knit a lot. So DPNs, very traditional method. A lot of people use them and prefer it, but it's not my preferred method of using it, but it is one. And it's not one to forget about and move away from completely, because DPNs are also useful when you get to other parts of your sock project. But I'll talk about that in a minute. So the next option that you've got is the FlexiFlips. So these needles are brilliant because they've got the little bit of, sorry, I'm trying to find one that I've already got. Yeah, because they've got this little bit of cable flexibility in the middle of them. They are great for holding a lot more stitches, so you only need to use 2 of them at a time for holding the stitches, and then 1 needle to knit around with. So for me, these are I'd say my second go-to method of knitting socks. Yeah, and I'll explain why in a minute. But yes, FlexiFlips, I do like using them. I don't always use them, but because I've got so many sock projects on the go at the moment, and I'm really sorry if I am repeating myself, because I've recorded half of the podcast before and I'm having to re-record it, and so if I have mentioned this already, I'm really sorry. But because I didn't have any needles left, because I started too many works in progress, too many projects, too many cast-ons, I didn't have any needles to start this cast-on with, so I used the FlexiFlips. And usually I don't use them for the body of the sock, but I do use them for the heel flap and heel turn and the toes as well. So they're brilliant. Advantages: they're flexible, you have fewer needles to keep track of. Unlike DPNs, they're very easy to keep track of because you've only got 2. And the length of the needle will very comfortably accommodate all of the gusset stitches. So you can keep your leg stitches on one needle and all of your gusset stitches on the other needle, and you always know that when you get to the larger stitch count, and it's easy to tell which are the back stitches because you've got a heel on the back, and the sole as well, and that's what you're working on as you decrease. Every time you get to the heel, you know that either end of the heel you are decreasing stitches. When you get to the leg, the front, which is just plain, you know that you don't decrease any stitches, you keep those the same. It's really easy to keep track of your needles. You don't really need a, well, if you're using more than one colour, you don't need a stitch marker, I've found. Yeah, but if you're using more than one, if you're using one colour, then I'll show you what I mean. When you're using more than one colour, you end up with, it's easier to show you on this sock because it's darker. Yeah, you end up with a line all the way down the edge of your sock, and it's where you sort of carry the yarn up the sock. So for me it's very easy because when I get to the beginning of the round, that's where my 2 strands of yarn are, so I know that's my beginning of round. So I don't need, with these socks, a stitch marker, but you may need a beginning of round marker when you have decreased all of your stitches and you've got back to the sole, and which is the same stitch count as the leg. you might need a stitch marker just to remind you where the beginning of round is, yeah. Because even though you will still know which are your sole stitches and which are your leg stitches, you need to know which end of your sock, which side, literally, was it this side or this side, which was your beginning of round. So, and depending on the pattern, that can change in the pattern when you pick up your stitches. So yeah, anyway, if you're only knitting in one colour, you'll probably need a stitch marker to show you which is which, where your beginning of round is. Negatives for FlexiFlips, again, the tension issue. So when you're changing between needles here, when you're so see, you've got this little gap in between your two needles, that tiny little gap. When you carry your yarn across and you knit from one needle to the other, that tiny gap can cause tension issues depending on how experienced you are at knitting with these kinds of needles. I don't have any tension issues myself. Just trying to see whether there's anything I can show you. But it's a lot of practice because I definitely had problems at the start. And I had like little ladders in my work. So that is just something to bear in mind. It's fine. It's nothing to stress about because with practice, maybe for the first half of your sock, you'll have issues, or for the first sock or even the first pair, but eventually you will start to adjust your tension and also do a bit of research, and you'll be able to see how to better knit your socks so that you don't have those ladders in between the joins. So FlexiFlips are not my go-to, but I will use them if I don't have my preferred method available. The next method I'm going to just discuss is Magic Loop. So with Magic Loop, you're using a long cable, usually longer than this. This is fine for if you're knitting one sock. I think this will be fine. But usually people for Magic Loop will use like a 40-inch or 100-centimeter cable. And Magic Loop is brilliant because you only need one cable. You've usually got one, you might have one lying around, although sock needles are much smaller than normal needles, like needles that you would use for jumpers and hats and things. The needle size is smaller. So you were usually using like a US 0 or a UK 2mm needle, 2mm, or a US 1, which is a 2.25mm, or a US 1.5, which is a 2.5mm needle. And usually those are the sizes that people will use for a standard vanilla sock. Usually interchangeable needles, interchangeable knitting needle sets come from 3mm up. So these could be great for colourwork socks when you're doing stranded colourwork, because you need to use larger needles usually because of the tension issues. But for socks, you would need to get designated usually fixed sock circumference needles. What am I trying to say? You would usually need to get fixed knitting needles, so you couldn't really get interchangeable ones that have the small needle size that you need. So I've just ordered some. I've just ordered a set of fixed 40-inch 2.5 and 2.25mm needles. And okay, so Magic Loop is a brilliant method. I would say it's one of the most popular sock knitting methods. I'd say now the two most popular ones are using circular needles rather than DPNs. Certainly among newer sock knitters, ones who learnt on DPNs or who can't get on board with the other methods for whatever reason, they may prefer to use DPNs and continue to use them, and it's absolutely fine. This is all just down to personal preference. Downside to Magic Loop. Again, when you change, so Magic Loop is done by casting on your stitches, moving them onto the cable, splitting them in half, and then moving half of your stitches onto one needle and half onto the other. And then you just knit on your needles. So you'd pull out one needle and then you use the yarn to work from the back needle onto the front needle, and that's how you work in the round. You'd knit to the end of your stitches and then you'd pull out the next needle. Your loop would change. I'm not showing you very well because I have nothing to show you on. There's no stitches on this needle, and then you knit across, and you just do that for the duration of the project. Every time you change needles and start working on the next one, again, there's like an issue. There could be an issue with tension, so you could get ladders down your work again, like you can with the DPNs, like you can with the FlexiFlips. And again, it's just a case of getting used to it. I think with almost all methods of sock knitting, small circumference knitting, you do have the risk of getting ladders. I have bought myself 2 sets of needles, 40-inch needles that I can use to knit socks with, because I would like to knit socks 2 at a time. In some instances, not all the time, but on some occasions, and I'll show you. So I haven't got anything to show you on the needles right now, but I'll just show you Roly and Toad, my little frog and toad that I've shown on the channel before. So I will sometimes sell these little frogs. If you have joined me from Instagram, you will know that most of my feed is full of frogs and toads. This pattern is by Claire Garland of Dot Pebble Knits, but the clothes are my own patterns that I designed. So I used the 2 at a time knitting method to knit the starts of the dungarees. This is not in the pattern, you don't need to do this. If you do buy the pattern, don't be alarmed or put off by that. This was just for me. I was seeing whether I could do them 2 at a time, and I could. So I knit the legs 2 at a time, and then I connected them across the middle, and then joined them all in the round, and then knit the back and the front. So I do have a little bit of experience at working them 2 at a time, and so when you work socks like that, you need 2 balls of yarn, obviously in the same colour, and so however many colours. So if you were knitting in 2 colours, you would need 4 balls of yarn, 2 for each sock, and you would just knit each row twice, each round twice, and so that's very helpful. You'd get to the same number of leg rounds, the same number of heel flap rounds, heel turn rounds, gusset, toe. It would all be the same row, and so while you wouldn't be doing it any faster by knitting 2 at a time, it might be more, you might feel more of an accomplishment, because when you finished your project of knitting those socks, you will have ended up with a pair, and so there's less of a chance of second sock syndrome. where you don't want to knit the same thing again. Now, I don't really mind when I'm knitting colour work, I really don't mind knitting 2 socks, one after the other, but when I'm knitting in a single colour, so this is the Drops Nord Chestnut, beautiful socks. I really want to wear these. I love them. They're like great everyday socks that will go with anything, but they're not as fun to knit as colour work socks. And because I was ill when I knit those, well, I knit this and I was ill. Then I cast these on and knit them, and I am ill again, and I just didn't want to knit another brown sock. So it would be great. I've decided that I'm going to try. I will obviously have to knit the second sock of this, but the next time I knit a single colour sock, I'm going to try and do them 2 at a time, because I think for me, knitting colour work or knitting with colour is not really a problem. I don't have second sock syndrome, but with one colour, with a single colour, I do sometimes. I just don't want to, when I've got so many other lovely colours to work with, I don't want to just look at one colour. Even if it had 2 colours in it, it would make a big difference. But yeah, I think if I knit these 2 at a time, I would have 2 socks by now, and feel that sense of accomplishment from finishing a work in progress. You have obviously fewer works in progress if you finish your pairs all in one go. So that is a great thing about Magic Loop, and that is the reason that I will be attempting to use Magic Loop for my for a pair of socks in the near future. Now, my favourite method, my preferred method, is the last one I'm going to talk about, which is using a 9-inch or a small circumference circular knitting needle. So this one is, I think it's 9 inches, this one, because there are, so I just read a blog post today by a lady whose handle is, I think, Winwick Mum. I don't know how to pronounce that, if it's Winwick or Winnick. I'm not sure, like Fennick? I don't know. But really excellent blog. I have seen posts by her before in the distant past, but I've started following her now on Instagram. And she's got really great information in that post about small circumference knitting needles. So apparently you can get 3 main sizes, the 9-inch I knew about, 10-inch, and I think it's 13-inch needles. Hello, I'm really sorry. I am just sitting here editing the video, and I realised that the whole way through I've been referring to these as 13-inch needles, but they're not. They're 12-inch needles or 30cm needles. So every time I say 13-inch, please ignore that and think of that as 12-inch needles. So the 13-inch ones obviously are the bigger ones, but they're the ones that some people find most comfortable, because 9-inch circulars can, for some people, be really uncomfortable and make their hands cramp. I've got quite small hands. For me, the 9-inch circulars are fine. I don't mind knitting on them at all. My stitches are quite even, it's easy to work, I don't really have any issues. But I suppose maybe people who have larger hands or who have joint pain, joint issues, people who whose posture changes when they're knitting, so they're like more hunched and more tight when they're knitting with small circumference needles like these, the 9-inch ones. Maybe for them it would be better to size up to a longer length, so that they've got slightly longer needles to work with. So then she said that there are 10-inch needles. So 9-inch are 23 centimetres, 10-inch are 25 centimetres. I've actually just ordered some 10-inch circular needles, 25 centimetre ones, because I would like to try them. I'd like to just have more sock needles available to knit with. and I want to see what they're like, what the difference in needle size, cable size will be, how it will feel, because she did say the 13-inch ones for some people are just way too big. If you've got very tight tension as well, it could really stretch your stitches out. My stitches are fine on a 9-inch. I think they'll be fine on a 10-inch, because I do have some slack in these. Like sometimes it does feel like the stitches could fall off the needle if I've just like put it down and I haven't made sure that they're all, you know, you can even see it now when I pull one, the stitches move to the end of the other one. So I think 10 inches will be fine. I think for me, 13 inches will be too long. I think it will give me issues with my tension and with my needles, with my stitches. But for some people it's fine. I think she was saying that it's okay for her, that she doesn't have problems using that. But sometimes for casting on, it can make your stitches very tight. Now for me, when I use, so I have a caveat, I almost always, unless there's none available, use 9-inch circular knitting needles. But I will almost always cast on, unless I don't have them with me, I will cast on with the FlexiFlips. And the reason for that is because when you're first casting on, your stitches can be a bit tight, they can just stretch a little bit. The first round is fine, but casting on and joining in the round, it can be very tight. Some people do it all the time, they don't use anything else. I prefer to use these because it stresses me out casting on with these, so why would I stress myself out for no reason? So I just use these. I will cast on using the FlexiFlips, and then I will knit the first round with the circular needles, and so that will transfer all of the stitches onto those. I mean, I would knit in ribbing for the cuff, so then that would have all of my leg stitches on my circular needles, and I would just use those. Now what I do with my circular needles is I will knit the leg with them, and then when I get to the heel flap and the heel turn, I will again take these out, because some people are fine with it. They will use, I know one of my friends, she will use her 9-inch needles to knit back and forth on the heel flap, because you have to do it flat. So she'll knit back and forth on that, and then with her 9-inch circulars, she'll knit the heel turn with the 9-inch circulars, and then she'll go and pick up all of her stitches on the gusset, with her 9-inch circulars. So she just uses one needle all the way through the project, and then when she gets to the toe, she also uses the same circular needle. For me, I can do it, I have done it, I've tried to make sure that I've tried it so that I can see that I can do it, but I don't enjoy it doing it that way, because it changes I have to manipulate my hands, the yarn, the needle differently, and I just don't find it as comfortable. So what I will do is I'll do the leg, and then I will slip half of my stitches, which is what you use in a regular pattern for your heel. I'll slip half of them onto the FlexiFlips, one needle, and I'll just use that to knit back and forth. And that's why I said don't completely dismiss DPNs, because you can also use DPNs to do the same thing. If you don't have these, you can slip half of your stitches onto one DPN needle and knit back and forth with another DPN to do this section of your sock. Then what I will do once I've got to the heel turn, the end of the heel turn, is usually I will get my circular needle and I will knit across and start picking up stitches for the gusset. Depending on where the pattern is, it could be this side or this side, it just depends. The other thing you could do is you could use your DPNs or your FlexiFlips to pick up stitches to make sure you've got all of the whole stitch count that you need for the circumference of your gusset and sole. And then again, you can use your circular needles to knit the next round, so all of your stitches are transferred onto your circular needles. It really is down to preference. It depends on what you like to do. That's how I like to do it. I like to use a combination of these two. When I've finished the heel flap and gusset and sole of the foot, and I get to the toe, again, you're going from a 9-inch circumference to, I don't know, what's that, an inch? Something like that. So I will switch again to the FlexiFlips or DPNs at this point and knit the final toe section with those. Again, some people will do the toe with the 9-inch circulars, and that is absolutely fine if you like doing that. I don't like doing it, so I don't do it. But that's why I will always carry both of these with me. I'll carry my 9-inch circulars and FlexiFlips with me. So that's my preference. Disadvantages, it can be uncomfortable for some people. So going back to what I was saying about the different size needles you can get the 9-inch ones, but Winnick mum, she says that she doesn't notice a huge difference between knitting with a 10-inch circumference needle and a 13-inch circumference needle. She doesn't see a huge difference in the way her hands feel. But knitting with a 9-inch and between a 9-inch and a 10-inch needle, she can feel a significant difference, which I thought was really interesting, because you'd think it would be the other way around. So I am going to try out the 10-inch needles. I just think that the 13-inch will be too big for me, for my hands and my tension. But that is something to consider. Some people do find that it can give them cramp. It can be too uncomfortable to knit with the 9-inch. So I would suggest try the 10-inch. And if you've got quite a loose tension, maybe try the 13-inch if you feel you can go up another size. Yeah. So I thought I would just talk about the kinds of needles that I like to finish off. So this is my preference. The ChiaGoo, I think they're called lace twist shorties. So they come in US 0 to 3 or a 2mm to a 3.25mm needle size. And they come in 2 needle lengths as well. Every single size has 2 lengths. So you can create your own customizable needle. So if you prefer and you have the flexibility and the tension to have 2 longer needles either side of your cable, then you can do that. Sorry, it's quite fiddly to put away. But the way that I do it, and I know that a lot of knitters do the same, is they'll make up their needle like this. So they'll use the longer needle on the right hand side. I think that this might be flipped on the video. Right hand side, longer needle, left hand side, shorter needle. And that makes sense because you usually use your right hand to control your stitches a bit more, because your right needle is the one that you're actually knitting with. Your left needle, generally, if you're right-handed, your left needle is the one that you're sort of slipping the stitches off, but it's a stitch holder, and you're knitting off that needle onto this needle. So this hand and this needle is doing like the most work. yes, so usually that is how people will make up their needle, one with a longer length. And you can actually buy, I know that Addi and KnitPro, they actually make fixed needles that are like this, which have one longer needle, one shorter needle, and that's how people tend to like them. You get the longest length and the most flexibility using those needle sizes, needle lengths. So the ChiaGoo, I really like them. I think they come with 3 cables at different lengths. So I haven't actually looked into it. That's probably, let me see what it says on there. Okay, so the cable comes as a 5-inch or 13 centimeters, a 6-inch or 15 centimeters, or an 8-inch or 20 centimeters. So probably you can make all of those 3 sizes that I spoke about. The 9-inch, yeah, the 9-inch, the 10-inch, and the 13-inch. You could probably make all of them with this set. This is probably what it's made for. I haven't looked into it because I haven't used the longer cable, because I just know the sizes that I like, but I should try that. This post is not sponsored at all by ChiaGoo, but I'm just telling you the needles that I really enjoy using. This is my favourite because I know that because I love knitting socks and I love knitting colourwork socks, and I know that if I get a pattern and it's in colourwork, it could ask for a needle size that I don't have as standard. Like, I wouldn't use a 2.75mm needle, for example, for just knitting standard socks. But this has every needle size that I would need for socks. Or say that I was knitting with a finer yarn, and I needed to tighten up my gauge a bit. I might use a 2mm needle. That's not something that I just have lying around, but in this set I have everything, all of the needle sizes I need. So I know I can buy any sock pattern, any fingering weight sock pattern, and I will have the needles I need to knit it. So that's why I really like this. It's not like a cost-effective option. It was a bit dear. It was an anniversary present from my husband. I love it, but I know that this is not the most like budget-friendly option for a lot of people. So I don't actually have another one to show you, but these are my KnitPro Zing needles, which I've spoken about before. These KnitPro or Knitter's Pride in the US. Again, not sponsored or affiliated with them, but I love these needles, the Zing needles. I used to have, before I got the ChiaGoo ones, my very kind friend Emma, gave me a 9-inch circular KnitPro Zing needle. I think it was 2.25mm, and she gifted it to me, which was really kind of her, and I loved it. It got me hooked on using 9-inch circulars. It was just my favourite needle and I used it all the time. And yeah, it lasted, it worked really well. And then Bob bought me the ChiaGoos, and I was just using them more often, and eventually I ended up gifting on the KnitPro Zing needle to my friend who lives in Iceland, because she also knits socks, but she'd never tried a 9-inch, and we knit some socks together when she was over at my house, and she liked it, so I said that she could have it because she enjoyed using it. So sorry Emma, I hope you don't mind. But yeah, your gift that was the gift that kept on giving, so thank you. I love that Zing needle. Now that I have I'm sort of running out of circular needles, I have bought myself a couple more to try from a different brand that I've never used before. So I'm going to try them out, and then I'll let you know what I think of them. It will take a couple of weeks for them to come, so I haven't got them yet. But I would definitely get KnitPro Zings in the future if I needed to. because I really like them and the quality is good. The only caveat I have with the circular needles I got from KnitPro, I bought myself KnitPro Nova needles. This is a KnitPro Nova knitting needle, just like a standard plain metal needle. And yeah, it snapped. It came apart at the join. The needle and the cable snapped, and so I returned it. I think I bought it through Amazon, returned it. I got another one and it did the same thing. I had to return it. So I wasn't very happy with that. So that's the KnitPro Nova, but the KnitPro Zing was brilliant and it held up to a lot of knitting and I didn't have any problems with it. So I'm happy, I have a good conscience in recommending that needle. It's a lot more cost effective. I think at the moment on Amazon it's like £7.50. I don't know what it is on US Amazon, but again it depends. Sometimes you can get it on get them on sale, or on other websites on sale. So if you have the time and you can hold out, maybe you can find them cheaper. But yeah, I'd say that was a good investment. I haven't had any problems anyway with my Zing needles. I don't think I've had any other specific 9-inch or 10-inch needles. Those are the ones that I use. So that's my preference. 9-inch needles and FlexiFlips or DPNs, whichever, to do the starting with the cast on, the heel and the toe. So I think that's everything that I was going to cover. Yeah, thank you very much for joining me today and for hanging in there with the sound issues and my sore throat and everything. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching and for all of your support. I do just want to say that I've got some friends visiting me this week, next week, Monday, and they're staying for a couple of weeks, so I don't know whether I'm going to be able to record the podcast. I'm going to see what I can do. Maybe I'll be able to squeeze in some recording time at some point, but let's see. I will try. So yeah, thank you again for joining me, and thank you for all of your comments as well, your feedback, and for anything you'd like me to talk about in a future podcast episode. Then yeah, please do let me know, and thank you for everything, all of your tips so far. So until next week then, have a great one and happy knitting. Bye.